Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know what led to the Protestant Reformation? On October 31st of 2017, we will be commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, which has its origins in October 31st, 1517, when Martin Luther supposedly posted 95 theses on his church door in Wittenberg, Germany, the town where he was teaching and preaching. So in order to understand what led to the Reformation, it is important to kind of back up and try to understand what was happening. Martin Luther, who was born in 1483, was born into a Christian church that was constantly caught up in many abuses and scandals. The abuses centered around the church being experienced more as an institution concerned with power, wealth, influence, authority, and wielding that authority in whatever way it wanted, and was not really being faithful to gospel values or gospel principles and the lifestyle that Jesus presented to us. So there were many, for over 2 centuries, people had been calling for reform. These were people within the church, priests, cardinals, lay people, calling for reform of the church and getting rid of the abuses and being more faithful to gospel values. What were some of these abuses? Well, we could start with something that we call the Avignon Papacy, which from 1304 to 1376, the Pope was actually residing in France, Avignon, France, and not in Rome, and was under the great influence of the French king and the French cardinals, creating a real loyalty gap among people in the Christian world. The Pope returns to Rome in the year 1376 and initiates what comes to be known as the Great Western Schism, in which not one, not 2, but 3 popes are now running around claiming to be the legitimate popes and demanding the loyalty of the Christian world. Both of these, by the way, the Great Western Schism came to an end in 1414 when the Council of Constance was called to really reform the scandal and bring new reforms into the church. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long, but at least there was an attempt to reform back in 1414 that was ended in 1417. Many other abuses that existed in the church at the time were things like simony. Simony is the buying and selling of church offices and church positions and so on. If you had the right amount of money, you could purchase whatever you wanted in the church. Nepotism was another scandal. Nepotism is the hiring of relatives regardless of experience or whether they know the job or not, or influence because you are a relative of someone higher up and so on. And then there were dispensations, various dispensations. This was an exercise where bishops or church authority would dispense you from church rules if you paid the requisite amount of money. So it led to all sorts of abuses there. Along with that, there were many superstitions and much magic associated with the beliefs and practices of the church. Especially when it came to things like relics and the multiplication of relics and devotion associated with relics, as well as the selling of indulgences. The other thing that complicated matters even worse is that there were no seminaries, and so many of the priests that were ordained were fairly illiterate, which led to there being very poor spiritual guides to the rest of the congregations and the rest of the church. And so, as a result of these accumulated abuses and so on, many people over a period of 2 to 3 centuries called for the reform, were aware of the abuses and called for the reform. There are people like John Wycliffe, John Huss, Girolamo Savonarola, Desiderius Erasmus, who was actually a contemporary of Martin Luther. They called for reform of the abuses and for greater fidelity to gospel values and gospel spirituality. They wanted a more active involvement of the laity, especially in church practices and decision-making. They also wanted a greater focus on the gospel values and the simplicity of the gospel and being able to read and understand the gospels. Therefore, they wanted the Bible as well as the liturgy in the vernacular, in the language that the people can understand and participate. Many of these reformers were denounced to such as heretics. Many of them were persecuted, and a good number of them were killed as a result of their taking on the challenge or challenging church authority. But still, many of these reforms continue to be called for. Many people continue to call for reform, and one of them would be Martin Luther, who would take the ideas of many of his predecessors who challenged the abuses in the church and would really himself, in a unique set of circumstances that we will discuss further, actually succeeds in challenging church authority and demanding reform. Unfortunately, all of this led to a split in church unity that we know as the Protestant Reformation. So I hope that this has explained a bit about some of the causes that led to the Protestant Reformation, and I hope you'll return again to more Do You Know series questions as we explore the role that Martin Luther played in the Reformation as well as the Catholic response to it. So I hope to see you again. Thank you very much.